Hello and welcome. Let's continue our conversation on Stoicism. We had ended up in Book 7 of the Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and I rather like the first section. This is wickedness. This is what you have often seen. And you should have. No, you shouldn't have. That's wrong intonation. And you should have this thought ready to hand against any eventuality. I have seen this often before. Generally, wherever you look, you will find the same things. The histories, ancient, more recent, and modern, are full of them. Cities and households are full of them today. There is nothing new, all is familiar, and all short-lived. So we have a couple of, I think, Marcus Aurelius's favorite themes in this, right? There is, for example, everything is temporary, which includes life, right? Life is a temporary thing. So no matter what you are going through, at some point that will pass. But this also reminded me of a very Stoic exercise. So the part of this is what you have often seen, and you should have this thought ready to hand against any eventuality. I have seen this often before. I think there are two interesting things that we can talk about regarding that. The first thing is, yes, you may find that you have been in a certain situation many times before. And when you have been in a situation many times before, then it is not a very likely thought that that situation is going to be incredibly different from what it was the previous times. Simple example. Go to a supermarket Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m. It will be very, very busy, right? So you know what to expect. But that's not, that's one thing, unless you get really stressed out by crowds, for example, then that could be a big thing for you. But I think what is even more relevant to us is that often this is the case for psychological matters as well. Often people go through similar type situations with similar people, and every time it ends up the same way. Do you like my new microphone? Is the sound clearer? Yeah. I'm trying to do this in a sort of public broadcasting. Let's continue our discussion. Anyway, sorry. So this is an issue, right? You run to the same situation with the same people time and time again. And the result of that can be quite disastrous because every time the same thing happens. And often, this is a bit overquoted, I feel, but Einstein, right? What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing twice, but expecting different results. But on the other hand, when you think about it, that really is quite a powerful statement. Very often we try those kinds of things, right? We try to do the same thing again and again and again, and we keep going through the same outcomes with the same people. So I think that is one thing to be very aware of. And just being aware of that can already make a difference, because it can influence the way you approach that situation in the future, if you wish to approach it again. It could also be an option to not approach that situation again, if that is an option for you. Another thing that I believe to be a very powerful exercise in Stoicism, and this is actually pragmatic Stoicism. This is something you can do in your everyday life that can help you out in certain ways. And that is what they call Premeditatio Malorum. And I'm pretty sure we've talked about that before, but a lot of these videos by now, so you may not have seen that. Premeditatio Malorum, in a nutshell, right? Premeditation on evil, right? It's a Latin term. And I have found that to be a very useful technique to use in life. So what you do with that, in a nutshell, is this. Marcus Aurelius is clear that he did this in many aspects of his life, but in a nutshell, and this sounds very morbid, so let me explain this. In a nutshell, you expect the worst. You just go about your life expecting the worst things to happen. Now, you have to be very careful with that, so that's why I really want to qualify this a little bit, because if you go around fearing everything, that anything terrible is going to happen at any point in time, you won't have much of a life. But there are specific instances, I think, where it is a very useful exercise to expect the worst thing to happen. Now, why would you do that? Why would you do that at all, right? Why would you approach things so negatively? Well, because sometimes in life things truly are negative. And some interactions are negative and always will be negative. That's a problem. And if you are able to think to yourself, well, today I'm going to do this or that, and I'll give you a concrete example in just a second. It's probably going to be terrible. The only possible outcomes can be that A, it is terrible, or B, it is not as terrible as you thought it would be. And if you approach things from that perspective, then this is not so pessimistic or depressing. It can actually become a very useful thing. So I'll give you this concrete example. Imagine, and I've completely made this up, right? Imagine that you're going to have a meeting with a colleague at work because you're working on a project together. And you know that you don't get along very well with this colleague, and you know that this colleague is is belligerent or sees things very differently from you, or is just not pleasant to work with, whatever. It doesn't matter, right? Now, if you go into this meeting thinking, and this is a very interesting aspect of Stoicism, if you go into this meeting thinking, well, it's probably going to be okay. This is what a lot of people do. Well, it can't be this bad. I must have made it worse in my mind than I actually did, so it can't be this terrible. And then you get into that meeting, and of course it is terrible because there's something off about this colleague. Whatever, it doesn't matter, right? It could be you, could be their interaction, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Something in that colleague upsets you. Of course, that's going to go awry again, and you're going to have a bad meeting, and you're going to leave that meeting frustrated. But that's what happens when you approach things from such a positive perspective of, oh, it's all going to be fine. It can't be this bad. Yes, it can be. It can absolutely be that bad in life. That's just a fact of life. It isn't like we don't live in a sugar-coated topping. This is the real world, and people are not always pleasant, right? So if you expect that, because this would be the Stoic approach. Instead of going into this meeting thinking, oh, it's probably going to be fine. She must be really nice. He must be really kind. It can't be this bad. Well, then you're in for a disappointment. And the problem with that is it can affect you. It can affect the way you then live out, so to speak, the rest of that day. You can be frustrated. Some people find it easy to let go of that. Some people don't find it so easy to let go of that. For me, it's not always that easy to let go of those things. That's why I like Stoicism. Now, if you go into this meeting with the premeditation on evil, Premeditatio Malorum, then you say, okay, this meeting is going to suck. It's going to be dreadful. And I'm prepared for this meeting to be dreadful. And then what happens? Well, again, one of two things. The best case scenario is the meeting was not as dreadful as you made it seem to yourself. And then you will be happy. And you will live out the rest of your day in relative happiness, because what you feared was going to be terrible was not really as terrible as you thought it was going to be. Result, you are calm and at peace. Or, this is the other option, it was exactly as terrible as you thought it was going to be. But then it's not as terrible as it might have been, because you expected it to be that terrible. What do you think of that? So then, it's still terrible, but you were prepared for it. And because you were prepared for it, you told yourself, listen, this is going to suck. I don't like this. It's not going to be fun. It's going to be a difficult interaction. And guess what? Then it was a difficult interaction. But you knew, you saw it coming, and you had prepared yourself for it. And I think that's a powerful way to approach the more unpleasant situations in life. Now, again, bear in mind, I realize that this sounds, if you've never done this before, this sounds like it's a very negative way to lead your life. But it's not, though. It's not. This is a negative expectation to make the whole situation better and to make the situation such that you can process it better. And that for you, it's easier, it's less upsetting, it's less annoying. And that's what makes this such a powerful technique to have in your arsenal to deal with the unpleasant aspects of life. It's not about ignoring them, but provided that you cannot resolve them, because if you can resolve them, what's the issue? Then you don't have to do this, you can just resolve it. But some situations can't be resolved. If there is an unpleasant colleague and you have to work with them, there's no other option, well then what is there to resolve, right? And then I think this can be a very powerful way to look at things. So there you have it. More Marcus Aurelius. This also ties into Epictetus with, for example, his, I want to say that's chapter 4 of the Enchiridion, where he goes to the bathhouse and he says, you know what to expect at a bathhouse, so expect it. There's going to be unpleasant people and people will jostle and may steal your stuff. So I want to take a bath and I want to keep aligned with nature, right? I want to keep calm. And if I don't keep calm, then I'm only doing one thing, namely taking a bath, but I'm not keeping calm, so I have failed, right? This is a very similar way of thinking. I'll expect the worst, and then it's either going to be that bad, or it's going to be better, but it can't be worse than I expected it to be. Net result, I will be okay. Important ways to approach life, I think. So, hope this was useful, and I'll see you again next week for more talk about Stoicism.